Welcome to the Nikon Z6 II. Today is the official release day, so hopefully if you've pre-ordered your product, you got a ship notification, or even better, you're picking it up from your local camera store. Always support your local camera stores so they can stick around so you have a place to buy things. I tell my wife that I'm going to pick up a box, and it's usually has a camera in it. I'm going to walk you through my Z6 II setup. We've spent hours and hours and hours and shot hundreds of thousands of photos with the original Z6. So this is all based on that and iterating from that what works, as well as kind of a bunch of crowdsourced comments and suggestions for how to set up your camera the best. So I'm gonna hopefully bring you kind of an overall general setup guideline if you are an events and portrait shooter or a wedding shooter like I am, or even a landscape shooter. These settings should be good kind of for anything in there. If you're into something a little bit more advanced with really fast moving wildlife, I might not be the person to talk to you about it. But regardless of what style of photography you're in, I do feel like this will give you a base to build off and customize out yourself. Everything I'm going to show you is what I personally do and how I run my cameras at weddings and events and shoots and out doing landscape photography or travel photography or street photography. You can obviously season to taste, pick what works for you and figure it out. And actually, honestly, post it in the comments below if you have any suggestions for other settings to change or modify, or things that have helped you out in the past Z series products. So getting to the camera, I'll actually unbox one of the new Z6 IIs here for you. I don't know which one it is. I feel like it's the one that was on the top. This one weighs more. Inside your camera, you get some attachments as well, some cable management attachments and a USB-C cord, because you can charge your camera just with a regular USB-C charged into here. You don't need any special adapters or anything, which is really, really nice. And then also the update with the Z6 II, the Z5 as well, that now not only does it accept USB charging, but you can charge while you're actually using the camera. So you can have the camera on, you can be doing a time lapse and also charging the battery, which is pretty cool. Original Z6 II, the camera has to be in the off position in order to charge by USB-C, at least at the current firmware. I don't know if that's a thing that they could possibly update with firmware to unlock that capability if you put a new battery in it. But for now, you can do it on the Z6 II, and you probably have purchased one, and that's why you're watching this video. Here's the camera. Very exciting. And the most exciting part is obviously you get to peel that off. It's very nice. I don't personally use a screen protector or anything. I've never had any issues. The pre-production Z6 II that I had a few scuffs in it, so I don't know, maybe they're just running that camera too hard, but in real life, doing hundreds of thousands of photos with all of my Nikon products in the past, I don't think I've had any camera that I haven't shot into that high a volume with. My D700 is actually over 1 million shutter clicks on the original shutter, and I have not scratched the back screen or anything. So I don't think that you personally need that. If it makes you feel more comfortable, by all means, but it's not something that I have used in my career as a photographer. I'm gonna plug this into an Atomos. It's a Ninja 5 recorder. Basically what this is gonna do, it's just gonna record the screen that you're seeing in front of me here. I would recommend, especially if you're getting more into the video side of things, or you have a desire to get into the video side of things, to get some sort of external recorder with a screen such as the Ninja 5. It makes your life as a video producer just a lot easier when you're actually just kind of in the field. You're able to really see what you're doing, as well as you have lots of different options of ways to actually see the image. And you can do things like you can have a LUT that's loaded into this recorder, and you can be watching your footage back recording N-Log, which is just kind of standard flat profile. And you can have your LUT preview on here, so it's actually showing you something that looks more close to the final image that you'll be processing, but still recording the actual just kind of N-Log style video that's flat profile, so you're able to make any adjustments in post. The way that I'm going to show you setting up this camera is how I do it, and I would say 99% of the time when we're out in the field, unless we're shooting a very specific project, what I'm doing to save myself time and effort in post-production is I'm actually setting the camera as close as I possibly can to my final image, which means I'm in the, we'll go through this, but I'm in the actual setup and the picture menus, making my image look pretty much like the final edit rather than doing any color. This might be bad advice for you if you want to get into the cinema industry, but for myself as a YouTube creator, as well as just a general, I guess, commercial film creator around town here, and also a wedding videographer from time to time, that is how I've discovered just works the best for me. And also, even though you are creating kind of that final burned in image look on video with this. I do have a lot of leverage that maybe not as much as if I was shooting in N-Log or some sort of other flat profile, but I really do have a lot of abilities to brighten up footage or change white balances a little bit, and I've never really had the footage break apart too much. For your actual photography files, you'll notice that you're able to push them really beyond what you should ever expect, and you'll always get great results, and the files hold together really well, so be proud that you purchased one of these cameras. Before I turn the camera on, I'm going to hold down this button and rotate the front lens cap, take that off. One thing that I do hope is maybe fixed in a future Nikon Z series model is that the sensor just isn't exposed all the time. So if you are changing lenses, make sure you're changing them in a more controlled environment. If you're outside at the beach and it's windy, don't change your lenses, just whatever you got. Like, make sure you know what you're going to shoot when you go in, put that lens on. If you're in the comfort of your own home, by all means, make sure the camera's off 100%, but you can change lenses in here, it's no big deal at all. But I would say to make sure you get a few sensor swabs, so that if you ever do notice that you're out in the field and that you're maybe at f6, or maybe that's not a real f-stop, maybe 6.3, maybe f8, and you're starting to see little pieces of sensor dust, that if you can just quickly go in and just do an on-site sensor cleaning yourself, and it's usually going to be good enough that you're able to do yourself in most cases. And the frequency, I would say after a month or so, it becomes needed to clean your sensor. I also change lenses a lot, so maybe if you don't change lenses, this isn't a big deal. All right, loading into the camera. When you first turn the camera on, one, it loads into auto mode, so just the green camera mode up here. I usually shoot in manual or in aperture priority, so I'm just gonna move it to manual so that when I'm customizing the settings, that I know that I'm customizing it for the manual menu option. If you are in the green auto, you will notice that maybe not everything that you want to be able to control is available. So if you're into automatic modes, maybe head to P mode, where you're actually able to control a little bit more overall. The first thing, you can see the little clock flashing up in the top corner there. First thing, go in and set your time. Time zone is under the setup menu. Time zone and date. Today is, what day is today? November. I'm in Toronto. Time and date. 11. Two. Right now. I will go into my other camera bodies and I will make sure that this is the same date and time that I'm seeing on all of them. Specifically, maybe as a wedding shooter, that it is important to have my cameras to be properly timed. You can fix it in post, but it's way easier if you just kind of do this and don't change it through the middle of your shoot if you realize that you forgot. But to just set everything up in the beginning, I personally, depending on circumstances, I will usually not adjust. If you're in a place that has daylight savings time, I usually don't adjust for that. I just leave it an hour wrong all year. And I guess typically I would say that my cameras are usually set for the summer months because I'm out there the most taking photos. All right, moving back. This is also a touch screen, so if you want to touch it, you can do that. Moving up here, there are a lot of settings that default come really great. I don't have a card in here. Do I have a card in here? I'm gonna put a card in here, and I'm gonna talk to you about one of my favorite Nikon features. So, putting an XQD card in here, just 2 card slots. One's XQD, one is SD, as I'm sure you're aware. One of my favorite Nikon features is actually how easy it is to increment by 1 your storage folder. You can come in here and you can go storage folder, and all I do, so if I'm doing maybe 3 family sessions back to back, I'm out there in the park, after each individual family session, will come over here, select folder by number, go to the right, and it automatically increments by 1, and then I hit OK. And now I'm shooting in a different folder on my card, which I personally find to be very helpful just for organization. The other really cool thing with Nikon specifically is that when you do that, when you create another folder, it doesn't actually reset all of your files to 0, which means that they won't all just be like 001.nef and just like all the way down. NEF's a raw file for Nikon. So it's not gonna name them all the same things, and when you start a new folder, name them all the same things in there because it gets confusing. It'll just leave off if you shot 1,000 images at your last shoot and you go into the next folder, it'll be image 1001 and it'll start to count down from there, which I really like, and it's so easy to do this. It's just training your brain to actually remember doing that. DSC stands for digital still camera, which I didn't know until I looked it up like 10 minutes ago. I'm like, what is this? Why? I'm gonna call this, I think what most people do, whatever your initials are and then a number. Touchscreen, again, makes it nice and easy. TJ4 will be this camera. I will likely set this camera to be TJ5 so that I know what I'm shooting. You can also name them like Z6 I, Z6 II, whatever you want to call it. Primary slot, I'm going to leave it on the XQD because I find that as a wedding shooter specifically, it's super helpful for me to get home at the end of the day and have a super fast card that I can just put in the card reader and just download everything really fast. Secondary slot function, depending on what you're shooting, I would say to pretty much like shoot one-to-one backups. This is photography only, so if you're shooting video files, unfortunately it won't be backed up to the second card. So shoot video files, we'll talk about that in a moment, but definitely to the XQD card. I'm going to set backup, so it's just doing one-to-one. Anything that I shoot on the XQD, it is immediately copying to, or I guess at the same time, just writing to the SD card as well. And then when I come home from an event, usually what I'll do is I'll pop the XQD card out, I'll download everything from that, and then I'll put the SD card in and just verify that the same image numbers exist, or do a quick little drag. And if it pops up that I just have to skip every file because it all exists, that's fine by me as well. What I used to do actually was I would shoot RAW, primary, and JPEG onto my second card. I also shoot, we'll talk about that in like 20 seconds here, but I also shoot RAW plus JPEG all of the time. Choose image area is a cool thing for Nikon. So basically as a shooter of video as well as photography in an event style environment, that I'm able to go from full frame into DX mode very quickly. I don't use these two others too often, but from full frame to DX to get that 1.5 crop is very helpful if you're in, say, a wedding ceremony in a big church and you just want to get that close up, but you don't want to stand in front of the parents in between their son or daughter getting married, that you can get a little bit of extra reach out of your lens. What that does is it'll actually give you less megapixels overall, but I would personally say, like, as long as the majority of your files are shot at the 24 that are in this camera, that I don't mind giving a few frames that are maybe 16 or 12 or whatever the actual, I should know this since I'm doing a tutorial. You get less megapixels. I don't know how many less. I'm going to call it 12, and I'm going to correct it right here if I screwed that up. You can also set that to a custom button. I, in the past, always on my Nikon digital SLRs had it set to one of the front buttons, but I set my front buttons on this camera a little bit differently. Choose quality. So you might come here and you're like, why can't I select RAW? And it's because it's hiding up here. I always go up here. I'm fine with RAW plus JPEG normal. The reason that I shoot JPEG normal as well as RAW is because, again, coming home from a wedding day or even anything that you'd want to back up, I find it way easier to just quickly back up the JPEGs. I will also say that the JPEG quality that comes off of this camera is really phenomenal. All Nikon cameras really amazing JPEG files. And for the most part, I find myself editing the RAW file. When you load it into Lightroom, it basically shows you the JPEG preview and then that melts away and you get the more flat RAW photo. There's ways to automatically make it do some things, but basically you're getting the RAW file, and I usually find myself editing that RAW file back to actually look like the JPEG. So I'm, in a lot of cases, if I'm in a controlled environment and say it's a family shoot, I shot everything under a tree during golden hour, it's very easy for me to just go from all the JPEGs and just do a quick little contrast and color edit based on that, and then send that off to the client. And honestly, the Nikon JPEGs are phenomenal, and I'm super happy with that. Image size, you want large and large as well. RAW NEF recording. I shoot 14-bit. You can shoot 12 if you want, but you might as well shoot 14. And I also run lossless compressed. I haven't really noticed any real life differences from shooting an actual uncompressed file versus this. I would suspect maybe it's more taxing on the battery in the camera, which is fantastic, by the way, and way above the specs that Nikon says on the website. I think they rate it at like 350 photos or something, but you get way more than that. ISO settings, you can set max ISO. So if you have a max comfortable ISO, you can set it here if you ever are running automatic ISO. I personally, for the most part, am running ISO specifically set to one thing. There are a few times that I will run auto ISO, but I think for the most part to manually control that, I think is nice. But if you want to set that maximum sensitivity, you can. And then minimum shutter speed as well. This is something that I will change. So basically, if I am running on automatic ISO, I don't want the camera to go below 1/60th of a second, or maybe we'll even call it 1/100th of a second. So basically what's happening, if you're outside, you walk inside, the shutter speed comes down to let more light in, it'll stop at 100, and then at that point it'll start incrementing the ISO up to make sure that that shutter speed is a minimum of 100. Coming over here into white balance and looking through here, so some of them have secret second settings. So if you're here and you come to the right, you hit the right arrow, in auto, you actually have 3 options here, which I think is very interesting. As a wedding photographer, I'm usually keeping the warm lighting colors. And I think that that's maybe something that not a lot of people know. So I would say make sure you're aware of these 2 settings. And then also when you get into lighting modes, if there's a number beside it, like there is here in fluorescent, there's a number of different fluorescent lighting options that you have, and they are wildly different. Like you'll walk into a space, you'll be like, wow, this isn't fluorescent at all if you just set it to default fluorescent. But when you start going through them, you might find one that's kind of bang on. If you ever can't find exactly the temperature that you want, you can come in here. You can also set a button to do it, and you can actually just set your manual Kelvin white balance so that everything is exactly as you want it, as well as the greens and magentas. My picture control, I usually just set it to standard and I leave it there. If I'm doing anything really specific, this is for photography, and also I'm shooting RAW, so I'm shooting RAW and these aren't actually affecting my RAW photo, so they're affecting the JPEG file only. You can set it so that it automatically applies everything if you want, but I find that by just setting it on standard, it's good enough for most situations. Color space sRGB is totally fine. Active D-lighting is maybe something that I do that not a lot of other people do. I think on the internet, you're not supposed to touch this and you're supposed to leave this off. I like to set it to high. I like to set it to high on both my photography, my photo settings, as well as my video settings. And I do that simply, kind of what it does is it enhances and bumps up the shadows a little bit so you get to see a little bit more detail. And then it also kind of brings down and saves a little bit of your highlights. It doesn't theoretically add dynamic range, but it kind of effectively adds dynamic range, which is pretty cool. Long exposure noise reduction off. I will just do that in post-production if I ever do need to do it. And then everything else, I leave as standard. We'll be doing a lot more talk on a lot more videos about the AF area modes, as well as on here as well. Vibration reduction as well, if you're somebody that's shooting sports, also important to know. If you're on normal and you're trying to do like panning shots, the VR is going to react a little bit differently than you would want it to. If you're on sport, it will track and it will pan a little bit better. As somebody that just shoots weddings and events, normal is totally fine. All right, another important thing for wedding and events shooters that you can just do silent photography now, which is really, really nice. Coming down here, file naming. I'm going to change this as well. I'm actually going to call it something different than my, we'll call it TJM. Just so that these files, when I'm looking at my card, that the video files will be incremented down below, so they'll all stick together rather than being interspliced within the photo files that are up there. So destination, 100% you want to be setting this to the most secure card, which in this case is the XQD card for sure. Image area, again, you can flip between those modes if you want to get into that extra crop. The cool thing with video is that if you're shooting an HD frame, that you can go into DX mode and you're not losing megapixels. It's not shooting a 720 frame because you're in DX. You're actually shooting a full HD frame, but then just getting that additional reach from being in DX. Movie quality, high, absolutely never put that in normal. It looks weird, it starts to look very potato. Movie file type, I am quite fine with MOV. Depending on what your computer responds best to, I would say that the movie file type for me mostly comes down to what my computer can interpret and work with the easiest. And in my case, I've had no issues with the MOV file, so I'm going to leave it at that. You can turn your auto ISO off here as well. I should have mentioned that in the photo section. Or if your ISO button, the one that's up top here, you can hold that down and hit the front wheel, left or right, and it'll turn you from auto ISO to off. That's usually how I control that. White balance, you can set this if you're a hybrid shooter and you're doing both photography and video coverage. You can set this to be the same as your photo setting, so everything carries over, and I am personally going to leave it as that. If you're ever shooting in an environment that, really any environment, if people are in good light, if they're in shade, always white balance for the actual skin tone. So if somebody's face is in the shade, make sure your white balance is set to shade, especially if you're shooting video, so that you're actually getting that like good proper file, actually, so you don't have to do anything with it in post-production. Active D-lighting, again, maybe something that the internet will hate, but I'm setting that to high. Everything else down here is just set to what it comes defaulted as. Microphone sensitivity, I will do manual, simply because I use an external microphone quite often, and I have controls on the back for my microphone. So I set this to 9, and I feel like that's a good kind of happy medium that I'm not getting any static. If you were to crank this all the way up to something like 20, you're going to be getting a lot of just kind of background hiss, but as you get closer to something that it's not really kind of maxing out the preamp, which around 9 or even less, you can, technically if you have a good microphone, you can go as low as you can possibly go. But I just like being around 9 so that if I don't have the shotgun microphone plugged in, I'll still be recording a little bit of that audio through the actual built-in microphones. And then coming down here, frequency response, you can definitely set it to vocal if you're interested, but I find the wide range just works very well. And time code if you really want to get into film. All right, coming over here into autofocus modes, there is a lot to go through. You can get really in depth into everything, and everything for the most part, you can kind of figure out what it does just by hitting the right button over here and loading into the menu. So basically what this is that priority goes to either the release, so when you hit the button, or when it achieves focus. So based on your settings, I'm usually leaving that on release. I'm usually leaving this on focus. Everything else I'm leaving as it is. I'll talk you through what I set my front buttons to be, because they control most of my autofocus settings. Coming down here, I also turn my built-in AF assist illuminator off as well, just for as a bright light. So I don't need that coming on by accident when I'm in an environment. I'll turn it on if I absolutely need it. Everything else, out of the box, looking good. You can also customize your continuous low shooting speed. So there's a button on the back that just is what the graphic is here on the side on the left. And you can hold that button down and you can scroll through from CL to C high to C high extended, or single shot. I think 3 frames a second is good. I'm gonna say for me as a wedding shooter, I never need to go over 4 frames a second. So I will typically either be in single shot or CL at 4. Moving down here, not a whole lot to change. As I get to flash sync speed, I do pretty much all of my off-camera flash is high sync speed. So I wanna go to auto FP within that so that I'm able to just like set my shutter speed to whatever I want it to be. So going back to controls, as I mentioned, this is kind of an important one. So customizing my controls, I actually set this F1 button thanks to everybody's pressure to start doing this on one of my videos. I actually set this to subject tracking. So subject tracking becomes my F1 button. So basically what this does is it puts up on the screen a little box, whatever you select on that box. So if you pick somebody's face or you pick an object and you either half press the shutter button or you hold the AF on button on the back, it'll actually just track around with you. So it will actually just track that subject. So that is very important to have. And then the bottom button here, AF mode. So basically this just scrolls through all the different AF modes possible. And I'm gonna show you how to minimize a few of those. So basically it comes preloaded. I can demonstrate. So as you can see at the top there, it's highlighted in yellow and AFS to AFC. So that's nice and all. So you can quickly switch to the back wheel for that. But this front wheel, you're now switching through all of these different autofocus area types. And you can come over here into A7, limit AF mode selection, and you can get rid of any of the ones that you don't want to have. Just hit the right arrow, which means if you're now going through all these settings at the top, you can see that the animal autofocus no longer pops up in between any of them. So you can limit what you want if you find that you're just using 2 or 3. It's definitely something that is 100% worth doing. I personally find myself using the wide area mode with the face and eye, as well as the wide mode with face and eye within that, as well as single point and dynamic 9 point as well. And outside of that, I honestly don't use on a day-to-day basis everything, so I'm fine to leave that off of that dial just so I can quickly get in between those based on the situation. As I mentioned, a few other things. So auto ISO, if you're holding down the ISO button on the top here and you move the front wheel, you go from auto ISO to out of auto ISO. So that's the easiest way to switch that. You don't have to go through the menus to do that. And then by holding ISO button down and moving the back wheel, you're just moving the ISO up and down. If you hit the I button on the back of the camera, it'll launch you into a few more options of things that you can change. And you can also customize this menu. So if you want to add something like from DX to full frame mode on this back menu here, you can do that. You can also quickly switch between your vibration reductions. It's really just kind of a highlights list of the menu items that you actually use on a day-to-day basis. So whatever makes the most sense for you to put there, by all means, go ahead and do that. I don't change anything else with the exception of the time zone and date within here. Firmware version, make sure you update your firmware. These become entirely new cameras anytime there is a firmware update available. So I'm personally excited. The Z6 original, I feel like they capped out with how much they could improve the firmware based on just the hardware of the camera. Now there are 2 processors in this, so I am very interested to see how this grows over time and that we just kind of keep getting upgrades to our camera, which is kind of really cool. Everything else I leave as normal. If you're somebody that uses the app, anything like that, I'm sure there's dedicated videos online. I don't use anything in here or in here. I don't really set up a My Menu. My Menu is basically the I button on the back of the camera. One last thing that you can do, depending on how you're feeling, you can do image review and monitor only. So if you're taking photos, the image review is only popping up on the back of the monitor, which means that if you're in the EVF and you're taking photos, you don't want that image review to be up on the EVF. So monitor only kind of works as a digital SLR would. You take a photo, you look down at the back of the screen, it's gonna be there. But that said, when you're shooting a mirrorless camera, you're seeing the end image, you're exposing exactly for that. But personally, I do like to see on the back monitor every now and then, to make sure that I'm in the ballpark of what I'm trying to be doing. If my shutter speed gets accidentally too slow, I like to have that feedback sooner rather than later when I get home and have to go through my photos. So that is it. That is how I set my camera specifically up. That's how I set this camera up and this camera up and my Nikon Z6 original and my Z5 as well. Everything, regardless of what camera you have, hopefully this was kind of cross-platform enough, and I feel like it even bridges into the Nikon digital SLRs, which is kind of where I learned most of these settings from. But that's really all I do to set up a new camera. You can get pretty quick at that. I know this was a longer video, but you can really do that in just a couple of minutes if you ever do need to set up a new camera. So yeah, enjoy the Nikon Z6 II. I hope that you enjoyed my yellow jacket and the light here, the yellow light. Because yellow's Nikon. That's why it's yellow. I hope that you got that. That is all for today. If you're interested, all of my full-length courses and all the presets that I use in my photos and everything, there's a link to that in the description below. The member site, if you are interested specifically in wedding and or portrait and or family photography, is a very incredible resource. And there are, I'm gonna say, thousands of hours of content up on there now. And it's all tuned to running a business. So not so much just like, hey, let's go out and shoot things. It's more so the actual business skills required to get you up and running as fast as possible. Learn from my mistakes, the stuff that I did that I wish that I could go back and change. Just get out there and start your business today. That sounded like a weird advertisement. There's also a lot of content on the channel, so maybe have a click over there and see what else interests you. And don't forget to subscribe, and please like this video if you did like this video, if you found it helpful. I would appreciate that personally quite a lot. Thanks for watching, and see you again next time.